Hi. Hey, you can do better. Hi. Thank you. Respected principal, Vaishali, the panel chair, my dear distinguished HR leaders and fellow panel members, distinguished HR leaders from Cochin and nearby places, and of course, my dear future HR leaders. I'm very delighted to be here. I'm all smiles, as you can see. When I was engaged many years ago, my wife used to live here in Cochin, so it's very nostalgic for me. And of course, after marriage, we moved to Bangalore and other places. I'm very delighted to be here. I want to make a couple of confessions with you. I went to Don Bosco, I went to Loyola Madras for my master's. That's not the confession. That's a good news. You know, my mom told me that I did not speak a word until I was 3. Like any other mother, she was terribly worried. And she also told me that it was a joint family with well over about 25 family members. My granddad had 3 widowed sisters and they had a whole bunch of children, so they were all growing up. I think it was a happy, big joint family. So she couldn't even cry when her son didn't speak a word until 3. But that was until 3. Thereafter, I never stopped speaking. That's good news. My mother is really very impressed when I tell her that I make a lot of noise pollution around. I speak a lot these days. Seminars and conferences and a big mouth. That was confession 1. Confession number 2 was we had some fabulous professors at Loyola, Father Kashmir Raj, Father Chirakal. Many of us built a tendency to speak a lot. HR guys, I think, are big mouths, lot of noise. In addition to good work, of course, let me just protect myself. I need to return home safe. Father Kashmir Raj told many of us, you guys have a tendency to talk quite a lot. And remember, I think this is a piece of advice that remained with us for a long time. He said, you know, the HR speakers like us, we are immeasurably more talented than the most competent mother the good Lord ever created. And we couldn't figure out much. Father, why are you comparing with HR leaders and saying that we are much more talented, competent when compared to the most talented mother? Then he would go on to explain, the most competent mother has a huge challenge putting 2 kids to sleep. You guys can put 100 adults to sleep without any efforts. And that was a story. I think that remained green with us. We started to talk a little less, I guess. I'm going to spend some time talking to you about the VUCA world, but not so much the VUCA world, because Vaishali kicked off the discussion with a pretty good introduction to what VUCA world is all about. Anish and Ramana followed suit, drawing implications for managing self, also for managing relationships. I think those are very critical, and that is the beginning. Without managing yourself as a HR leader, or for that matter, any management professional, and managing 360-degree relationships, which Ramana very eloquently brought, what I'm going to talk and what Raj will follow and talk will become lot less effective. My focus today is managing contribution. And we have this huge issue of what do we understand by contribution. And as Vaishali pointed out, do our stakeholders recognize that we are contributing? I think it was in 2011, I ran a half-a-day workshop for NASSCOM in the HR Summit in Lee Meridian in Chennai. I chose a very controversial theme. I borrowed a title from a book and modified it slightly. And Som Mittal, the then chairman of NASSCOM, asked me, "Are you sure, Mali, you want this title to be kept?" I said, "Of course, yes." Som and I worked in HP for a long time together, so we knew each other. And of course, he knows that when I design a title, I had something in my mind, so he said, "Go ahead." The title was a little provocative, funny. I said, HR folks are from Mars and CEOs of Venus, where on earth or where the hell will they meet? Very provocative. And understandably, the ballroom of the Lee Meridian was packed, 650 HR leaders from ITES industry, and I think I had a gala time sharing with them my thought processes on the subject. The whole seed for the topic and discussion was, we could go to town and claim that we are contributing as HR leaders, but do CEOs believe? But prior to my workshop, I took NASSCOM's approval and did a short survey. From the list of CEOs and HR leaders who had signed up to be participants for the workshop, I designed a short questionnaire and asked NASSCOM to mail it to the CEOs and to the HR leaders. The question was pretty much the same. It had about 5 questions, very short survey. We asked the CEOs, how many of you believe your HR leaders are strategic? How many of you believe your HR leaders add tremendous value to the business? And we repeated the same questions with the HR leaders, but we saw to it that the questionnaire went to the same organization, so the CEOs. But of course, we maintained complete confidentiality. We didn't share who said what. But that kind of struck a note and opened up our eyes. 77% of HR leaders felt very affirmative about both the questions. Yes, we add tremendous value to the business, and yes, we are strategic. CEOs had a different story to say. No more than 43% of CEOs confirmed that perception. It's a huge disconnect between what I as a HR leader believe that I contribute and my most important stakeholder, my CEO on my board, thinks a lot less about my contribution. The second question had to do with what is your understanding of being a strategic HR leader? HR folks came with very many different responses. They said strategic HR is corporate HR, and that's the prevalent understanding in many places even today. And a whole bunch of them also said strategic HR is if you're managing end-to-end entire life cycle from recruitment to separation, retirement, that is strategic. A lot of them also said, when you sit at the head office and prepare policies and programs, you are strategic. Business leaders did not support any of these views, the CEOs. On the contrary, they told us, to the NASSCOM and to me who designed the survey and ran it, that we believe HR is strategic when it contributes to my goals as a CEO. Market share, geographic expansion, revenues, profits, and all that stuff. There's a disconnect. I'm not sitting on judgment, by the way. I would never. Like all of you, I'm a very hardcore, passionate HR guy. HR was not my profession. It was my passion, and it continues to be so. But look at the disconnect. That's where I think our education begins. What we believe as contribution has to be validated, more importantly, in a VUCA world. As Anish pointed out, as Ramana pointed out, and we will have an extraordinary sharing from Raj as well. VUCA world is very unpredictable. The very definition of value contribution is different. Many of you may have heard about Ian Matthias, the managing partner of McKinsey, who succeeded Rajat Gupta. Ian Matthias wrote a two-piece article in McKinsey Quarterly, downloadable for free today. If you type the title, The New Normal, you get those, both the part 1 and part 2 of New Normal. Ian Matthias, managing partner, when he wrote The New Normal, actually the McKinsey and Ian Matthias coined the term New Normal. What they meant was, in an otherwise ambiguous world, volatile world, uncertain world, complex world, the VUCA world, what you thought was normal is not going to be normal today, and what you believe is normal today is not going to be normal tomorrow. We are in for a new normal every day. The rules of the game are going to change. The players will have very different expectations as stakeholders. I think it's becoming hypercritical for HR leaders like you and me to appreciate and recognize that we are constantly living in what McKinsey calls as a world of new normal, the result of the VUCA world. Then amongst us, there could be non-HR business leaders as well. So we'll talk about contribution in a generic sense as well for a minute or two. But this is the agenda, but we will quickly move on. The way I define contribution, I haven't looked into, Random House or Oxford. I just gave an operational definition, but delivering something of value to the team and to the organization. So we talked about, Ramana spoke very well about delivering value to the team and each other, and the attributes required that Anish articulated. How are we adding value to the team? By the way, this is not the HR team, but the whole organization. And the organization at large, that has a positive impact on the future of the company, competitiveness of the company. It's a tall order in terms of what this demands. But I think we need to gear up. Let me focus on HR contribution. A fabulous piece, fabulous, by one of the world's best-known HR thought leaders and the guy who runs advanced HR leadership program. I had the good fortune of attending it at Michigan School. I was working for Philips, and they nominated some of the top talent within HR for this top-notch program at Ross School. Dave Ulrich and Wayne Brockbank were the co-program leaders. And he penned a very powerful piece that I have cited here in the Human Resource Management magazine Winter '99 issue, that this is how HR contribution should demonstrate and manifest in organizations. I think as HR was maturing, came out of the diapers, started to contribute, we were very operationally reactive. Even operationally, we were reactive. Somebody had to ask us before we could just provide. Go hire 25 people, we would. Go do this, go do that. I think we were doing I would say, a errand job. We were policy police and we were welfare watchdog. That was the need of the hour. Let's not make any mistakes. Then I think over time, our contribution went up to becoming operationally proactive. I think we started to get a little bit proaction, do things on our own without being propped up. Then we started to, I would guess, become a little bit more business partner, strategic partner, started to seek a chair at the strategy table. But right there, I think the contribution still remained strategically reactive. For example, if your board and your chairman and CEO asked you, we're going to expand our operations in Greater China, Argentina, Eastern Europe, anyway. And then you would just take notes and then look at things as to how to support the business. But The final level of contribution, which I guess most of us can get, is to become very strategically proactive. When you think of issues and opportunities and challenges way ahead of. For example, your board wants to do an acquisition in France, and that has, say, 500,000 people. Acquisition is a good thing, cross-border acquisition. You grow there, you develop your footprint. But if your intention is to eventually downsize in France, bring work to India, HR should be able to warn the board, as I did once. The only thing you can do in France, many other European countries, once you hire people, only other thing you can do is to love them. There's nothing else you can do. Or pay them, keep paying them salary until they find another job, and if they choose not to, you keep paying them. Consequences of. But this is just an example. I can just go on. I teach a lot of this stuff in my strategic HR programs. But unfortunately, the understanding of strategic HR is very limited. I teach at 4 IIMs, many other leading B schools. When I browse through the strategic HR course outline, I'm a little bit disappointed. Strategic has become a prefix to normal HR. Strategic recruitment, strategic training and development, strategic compensation, strategic downsizing, strategic grievance management, strategic HR compliance. We have reduced it to a prefix. Instead of recognizing strategic HR is about doing things that are very different from technical HR. Technical HR is the whole life cycle HR from joining to separation. Strategic HR is precisely what CEOs are asking. Partner with me, share my agenda, support my business, help me to win deals, help me to retain top talent, help me to expand, help me to maximize productivity. It has a whole business aspect that comes with it. It's not tweaking and changing a little bit of grievance management here or a recruitment there and stuff like that. I think the contribution happens when we have a fuller understanding of what strategic HR means and entails for all of us. I would not spend too much time. I have personally done some work in this area of what comes in the way of HR contribution. Several things. But I identified 5 traps that come in the way of HR contribution. Best practices trap. I think the HR guys get very excited attending conferences, seminars. A lot of best practices everywhere. In fact, my company where I led global HR for 8 years, I used to very jovially tell my 125, 130 strong HR team, hey guys and girls, you are allowed to bring up to 3, 4 best practices from your previous company. The day you bring the 5th one, you are fired. You might wonder why. What's wrong with this guy? Best practices are best practices for those companies, not necessarily for you. They are efficiency practices for you. Paul Allen from Xerox said this beautifully. By all means, benchmark, for God's sake, implement not best practice, but best fit, what is good for your organization. I think we need to avoid getting into this best practices trap. A lot of us are into it deep. Peanut butter trap. In the name of, by the way, it's very interesting that our education, MSW, MBA, education tells us people are very unique. People have very different set of aspirations, abilities. But when we treat, the way we treat them seem to belie that understanding. We have variety of reasons why. The reasons often HR leaders provide why they treat everybody same. That's what we call as a peanut butter approach. Everybody is same. I will treat everybody alike. Say, you know what, we have got to be above board and fair. We cannot discriminate. I think tailoring HR practices to different segments When you learn about analytics, the first thing you learn is how do you segment, the way marketing segments customers and treats them very differently. HR analytics demands that we treat employees very differently. Accenture Institute of Higher Studies head wrote a book called The Workforce of One, where he makes a very powerful case as to why we need to segment and manage people very differently. We cannot apply a peanut butter approach, which is a disaster. But we continue to do that. I think that's a huge trap. Engagement trap, I won't talk too much. When I say engagement trap, for many of us as HR professionals, our understanding of engagement is very, I would say, myopic. We have reduced engagement to pitiably entertainment. We go and ask CFOs for budget, give me more money, I need to engage people. But what do we spend the money on? Entertainment, picnics and what have you. If you want to use the money for picnic, call it as entertainment, not as engagement. You know, Daniel Pink wrote an extraordinary book called The Drive. He also did a 17, 18 minutes video clip is available on the YouTube called The Surprising Science of Motivation, where Daniel Pink makes a powerful case. You can engage employees only with 3 mantras. Giving them mastery, Anish talked about it, Ramana talked about it, mastery, giving them autonomy and the freedom of time, freedom of tools, freedom of technologies, and thirdly, purpose. Again, Ramana talked about it. How do you make your employees relate to a larger, higher purpose? Look at Aravind Eye Hospital, phenomenal example of how everybody is aligned. Look at many other organizations. So, if you want to engage people, please focus on mastery, autonomy, and purpose, not picnics and quiz and what have you. We have gotten into the engagement trap. Measurement trap, we measure what lends itself for measurement. I teach a full course on measuring HR at Narsi Munji and Symbiosis. I designed that course. Most of us don't even know how to measure HR effectiveness. We all have scorecards, we all have MIS. Most of them speak of efficiency. Where are we measuring effectiveness and impact? Because they are difficult to measure, we are shying away. Because these lend themselves for easy measurement, most of the scorecards end up with time to hire, cost of hiring, source of hiring, because they are easy to. I think we got to move away from the measurement trap of measuring things that lend themselves for measurement and somehow struggle to measure things that matter for the business and the organization. Innovation trap, that our definition of innovation is tweaking a performance appraisal system, changing the training room blackboard to green board or a whiteboard. But I think we are not creating a culture of innovation in the organization. Remember, HR owns culture. So many of these traps come in the way of HR adding value. We need to get over these. Here is my suggestion, that this is what I spoke at the NASSCOM summit. HR guys have to do 4 things in order to align with the CEO and the senior leadership team and make them recognize we actually matter and we contribute. Mindshare. I think HR has to recognize and appreciate what the CEO's agenda is. I dissuade HR leaders from doing a HR plan. For God's sake, if you have one, throw it out the window. Your CEO's plan is your plan. You don't need one as a HR. Be part of the corporate plan. Be part of the strategic plan of the company. Enjoy the mind share with the CEO. Let him or let her not think that you come from another planet and he or she comes from another and you're hoping to meet somewhere. Capability. And I think most of us have a competency program in our companies for business. None of us have a competency program for HR. So much so, I wrote somewhere very humorously, in many places HR leaders have adopted Microsoft Office competencies as HR competencies. If you can write a decent mail with MS Word, you are an HR executive. If you can crunch some numbers with the Excel sheet, you are a comp and ben expert. If you can do a decent PowerPoint like some of us, you are a vice president of HR already. MS Office competencies have become HR competencies. How sad it is. Strategic business acumen, technology leverage, change agentry skills, service orientation, cross-cultural competence, significant HR competencies. We got to build them. We really have got to build them. SHRM has done some extraordinary work. They even have a certification program on HR competencies. I would enthusiastically ask you to get to know more about it, sign up for that course. Contribution. We talked about, in fact, the whole session of mine is on contribution. Work with the CEO to ask what contribution he or she needs. I think it's their definition of contribution that matters for us, not yours and mine. Till cows go home, you and I can claim that we are making significant contribution. But those little cute survey from NASSCOM reveal, they have a different perception, watch out. Measurement we talked about, so report contribution and convince that you are adding value. This is a story around HR, how we can define contribution together with the CEO and demonstrate that we add value. We have a long way to go. I think most of us are somewhere between strategically reactive and strategically proactive, but we can get there. It's just a couple of miles away. As a management professional, just 2 minutes, I wanted to elaborate more on HR contribution, and then I will just do this more as a rounding off, and icing on the cake so that it's kind of more complete. This is Buffettology. Warren Buffett said this, it's only when the tide runs out, we will know who has been swimming naked. Very real. Good times, everybody can claim that I'm contributing, I'm a 100% club, I can jump, sing and dance. But during difficult times, organizations will learn to differentiate the men from the boys. And there, I think that's where the contribution really matters. Foundation for contribution. This holds good for HR as well as the rest of us. Value is in the eye of the receiver, not the giver. If you believe you're creating value, confirm it with the receiver. Understand business. For God's sake, have no functional myopia. Silos is very bad, but unfortunately that's very commonplace. Build chemistry with all stakeholders. Ramana talked about it. Recognize key business challenges. After all, your contribution is much more valuable when you help resolve those organizational challenges. Implement with missionary zeal and deliver superior results. The last bottom line out here is, remember, no matter who you are, your contribution is, in today's VUCA world, only as good as your last transaction. Nobody wants to hear your war stories that you did this. If I ever went and spoke, I did this in IBM, I did this in HP, I did this elsewhere, people are going to ask me, stop this, what are you doing here and now, today? So, remember, we are all on probation every single day, and we better contribute and get a confirmation we are contributing. Raise your personal bar every single day. Dr. Kano of Japan, the Kano model that many of you may have studied in marketing or customer service, says very vividly, what delighted yesterday won't delight tomorrow. It becomes a basic expectation. Very true with anyone's contribution. Day after tomorrow I come here, or 6 months down the road I come and make a presentation here, you will have far higher expectation from me or from anybody else. Raise your personal bar. Resuming once a quarter, I picked this up, very interesting stuff. Tom Peters wrote several good books after he branched off and came out of McKinsey. I read all the books, I loved them, but the book that I most loved was In Search of Tom Peters' Seminar, a collection of very powerful thought papers. He says every employee must prepare his or resume once a quarter. He is even encouraging HR folks like us to do a resume writing competition. I think it will send cold in our it will shrivel our backbone. But when Tom Peters says, write your resume every 3 months, what does it mean? He doesn't say, look for a job. He only says, if your resume hasn't changed for the last 2 quarters, you haven't contributed anything, you haven't learned anything. For that idea, he says, resume regularly. It's all about your wow contribution. Normal contribution doesn't help anymore. Raise the bar. Last piece. I know I've exceeded my time, but I told you I'm a big mouth. My mother is going to be happy. How do you contribute? Is there some ideas? And I won't expand on this, but I will just spend just a minute. A shift for all of us from being a very shallow generalist to becoming a serial master. As new normal keeps happening, demands on our contribution changes, competencies required will change. So becoming serial master in those future competencies as opposed to resting on laurels with respect to our past is not going to help. Become an innovative connector rather than an isolated competitor. Many of us operate in silos. We compete with each other. Klaus Muller, the Norwegian quality guru, I attended his program 20 years ago. He was asking a very innocent question. In your company, does your finance fight HR? Does your HR fight marketing? Does your production fight? Everybody said yes. Then he would ask, who wins? No, anybody who fights finance wins, everybody loses. Anybody who HR fights, HR loses, everybody wins. All those funny replies. But then he finally said, that's all nice but not accurate. When your finance fights HR, your HR fights production, your production fights inventory, competition wins. None of you win in the organization. So how are we going to make this and endure the shift from being an isolated competitor within the organization to becoming an innovative connector and create synergy in the organization? Finally, I think whether we like it or not, all of us are voracious consumers of companies' resources. I think as we even consume and learning to do more with less, we have to do a shift. We should become a passionate contributor and not just remain voracious consumer. I think these 3 shifts are hypercritical. Ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case. Thank you very much.